Okay, guys, let's take a closer look at plant classification in this video. You can see here quite a few different interesting plants that we might talk about or might see. Let's just kind of go through. I'm not familiar with the blue in here, but the rest we're going to talk about. So this is called a pitcher plant. This one that we can see, if I can get my pen to wake up. Come on now. There we go, right there. That is a pitcher plant. You can see right here we have foxglove, which is a pretty important plant. It is involved in making heart medication. It's also poisonous. If you eat it, it can stop your heart, which is not good. This is a sundew, which is a carnivorous plant. And then we have poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac, all of which are things we might find around here, especially poison oak and poison ivy. So plants are definitely interesting. Now, as we look at these, we see that there's a lot of big differences amongst these plants, right? And when we look at classification, we want to be able to break those differences down. So some questions we want to be able to answer from this video. We want to know the difference in a vascular and a non-vascular plant. We want to know the difference in a gymnosperm and an angiosperm. We want to know the difference in a monocot and a dicot. And then we want to be able to identify different life cycles for plants. So those are the four big things we want to get out of this video. Now, there are over 260,000 species of plants. And to start breaking them down, the first thing that we look at is whether or not they have vascular tissue. So we divide those 260,000 species, into a vascular group and a non-vascular group. Now, our non-vascular group are called the bryophytes. And non-vascular means that there's no tubes in these plants that will transport water or nutrients or food from one part of the plant to the other. So they don't have like veins, right? Think of those transport tubes kind of like veins in us that transport things around our body. If a plant is non-vascular, it doesn't have a specialized tube to do that. Instead, bryophytes depend on diffusion and osmosis to move nutrients from one part of the plant over to another. Now, your mosses, your liverworts, your hornworts, these are all bryophytes. And usually they are low-growing plants. That means like they're not real tall, and they live in wet areas. Now, our mosses are the most common bryophytes. Remember, bryophyte means non-vascular. Mosses are seedless plants. They have this little thin upright shoot that looks like a stem, has little tiny leaves on it, and that's the main body of the moss. Now, they do have root-like structures that are called rhizoids, and they are important because mosses are usually the first plant that will come back to inhabit a new environment. So if there's a big forest fire and everything dies, mosses are probably going to be one of the first things to come back. Now, our liverworts and our hornworts, you may have seen out in the woods if you're an outdoorsy kid. They're a little bit more scarce than the mosses are. They only live in wet conditions, so you might find, especially these little guys right here, around the shore of a creek or stream or in a kind of a swampy area. And that's just in that bryophyte family. So that's a non-vascular plant. Now, our vascular plants we call tracheophytes. You can kind of think like we have a trachea, right, in our throat, and a trachea refers to a vascular plant, right? It's the tracheophyte is a vascular plant. So they have tissues like veins, basically, that deliver water, nutrients, food, whatever, from one part of the plant to the other. And this allows them to be much bigger than the mosses, so they can be almost any size. And we further break down our tracheophytes into three groups. We have the ferns, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms. Now, when we look at these tracheophytes, we need to be able to identify the name of the tissue that is moving stuff around the plant. So we've looked at this before. When we did photosynthesis, we looked at a cross-section of a leaf, and we talked about this just briefly. The xylem carries waters from the roots up to other parts of the plant. The phloem carries nutrients and carbohydrates from the leaves out to the stem and then down to the roots or wherever it needs to go. So think of it kind of like veins and arteries, right? Veins carry blood back to the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. The xylem carries nutrients and water away from the roots. The phloem carries nutrients and carbs from the leaves back to the roots. So two different vascular tissues, just like we have two different modes of transporting blood. Now, our seedless vascular plants fall into the fern category. They have really, really strong roots. Right, their underground stems are called rhizomes, just very similar to mosses, and we call their leaves fronds. The club mosses and the horsetails also fall under the fern or under the seedless vascular plant category. You've probably seen a club moss. They look like little teeny tiny pine trees growing up out of the ground. There are over 1,000 species of club moss, so they're very common. And horsetails, which have 15 species, they're about 3 feet tall, and they look like a horse's tail, right? So pretty limited set of seedless vascular plants, just these three: the ferns, the club mosses, and the horsetails. Now, our seeded vascular plants, or plants that produce seeds, are broken into gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms produce cones. Angiosperms produce flowers. Now, there's only 4 gymnosperms alive today that are out there in the wild. They are the pine trees, the spruce trees, the fir trees, and the ginkgos. All right, this is a ginkgo here in the picture. They are plants that don't produce fruit on the outside of their seed, and instead the seeds are contained in cones. They also don't produce flowers. Right? Our angiosperms are all of the plants that produce flowers, and they're going to produce a seed that is contained in a fruit. Right? The fruit is the mature ovary that surrounds the seed. So anything from apple trees and peach trees, avocado trees, right? Roses, oak trees, grasses, cactuses, all of these things fall under the angiosperm category. Now, flowers are pretty useful. We've talked about flowers already in the year, but flowers are useful for attracting animals to the plant in order to ensure the plant is pollinated. They also protect and house the seeds that are important for the plant's survival of the species, right? For them to be passed on. Now, another distinction we make in the angiosperms is we break down angiosperms into monocots and dicots. Monocots have flower petals that come in groups of 3s, where dicots are in 4s or 5s. So you have like 4, 8, 12, 16, whatever, or maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, where a monocot's going to have 3, 6, 9, or 12 flower petals. Now, obviously, you could be 3s or 4s and get to 12. So it's like, oh, was it a monocot or dicot? Well, we keep looking. So monocots have narrow leaves, and their veins in the leaves are parallel. In a dicot, the veins in the leaves are branching. If you look at the embryo of a growing plant seed, monocots will have 1 cotyledon, which is the little stem-looking thing that comes out of there, where dicots have 2. Monocots are bundles of vascular tissue if you do like a cross section, and you'll see this on the next slide, where in dicots the vascular tissue is in a ring around the plant. And the difference in root structure is also useful. A monocot has a fibrous root structure, or a dicot has a taproot. So this image makes it a little easier to kind of visualize those things. So you can see the parallel veins is probably the biggest giveaway for a monocot versus a dicot compared to the net-like or branching veins. But you can also look at the cutaway, right, of where the vascular tissue is inside the stem of the plant, or you could look at the taproot, right? Is there a taproot there, or are all the roots basically the same size? And that can help you pick between monocot and dicot. All right, so that's how we break down and classify our plants. Now, the life cycle of plants are pretty simple. These are probably words you've heard before or seen on a package of flower seeds in your family's flower garden or something like that. The annuals have a complete life cycle in 1 year. They grow, they flower, and they die all in 1 season. A biennial has a 2-year life cycle. They grow They have leaves the first year. They store energy. They'll rest during the winter, and then they flower the following year. The potato is actually a biennial. We just don't see the potato flower because we dig the potato up before the second year comes. And then we also have perennials, which are plant species whose life cycle can last 3 or more years. So most of our trees, things like that, they're going to be perennials. So hopefully you can now answer these 4 questions. If you have any questions about this material, please send me an email or reach out, and I will be glad to give you guys a hand. I'll see you in the next video.